Welcome, everybody, to a Christmas episode of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend of Ben, one on Poker Stars.
And I'm your other host, East Coast Sam on Poker Stars. Yep, we're joining you here on Christmas to discuss the 2022 World Series of Poker as edited by CBS Sports and put on PokerGo. Lon and Norm are back, and they're here to discuss a very exciting, very riveting, very unique season of poker.
And really, what better way to spend your Christmas afternoon than watching two New England Jews talk about money and poker? So here we go, guys. The 2022 Worlds of Poker recently uploaded to PokerGo. It was brought to our attention from a very nice fan of ours on 2+2's Poker Forum thread that these were put up there. 15 episodes, very similar in direction and style to the year prior from 2021 with Karai Aldemir's main event victory. 8,663 players. This was a main event that our friend Adam Grosek did play in, lasting to the start-ish of day three and not making it much longer than that. 1,300 players were paid, $10 million for first place, 4 day ones, big blind ante, all the yada yada that we always talk about going into this. And again, I was pretty let down by the 2021 main event episode collection. You know, I kind of viewed it as like kind of third worst. Below the majority of the main events we've covered, but above 2018 and 2019. And so I really didn't know what to expect coming into this main event here. One that, you know, I wasn't the only one of the last three main events I was not in Vegas for, one that I had followed. I watched the PokerGo streams pretty religiously from day one up until about day 6 or 7, in which case work kind of got in the way of me being able to watch all of day 7 plus most of the final table. So kind of the opposite mindset I had from the year prior, where I was really engaged in the first half, for second half, because I'd been so involved in the first half. And Sam, how about you? What was your preconceptions of what to go into expecting with this main event?
Yeah, I mean, starting with the 2021 CBS coverage, I'm with you. I mean, this was a very forgettable season, very forgettable edit. We're not, again, trying to bash anybody who was at the final table, say that they're bad people, bad players, by no means. I mean, Karai Aldemir is obviously a very, very talented player. And Lakoko also seems to have some talent. I mean, he's made a deep run in this main event, as well as at a couple other WSOP events. So we're not trying to bash them or say they're bad people. It's just the way that their personalities were presented on screen was just very forgettable. You know, I felt I knew very little about Jack Oliver, who got third place. You know, I only knew so much about George Holmes, who got second place. You know, you have to tell a consistent theme and story. You have to really give us a sense of who these people are in addition to how they play. And I just didn't get that from this coverage. And then going into 2022, I mean, I wasn't in Vegas. I was able to see some of this, not all of it, the early days on live as it was streaming on PokerGo. And I was really disappointed with the final table. I mean, even within the top 36 people, let alone the top 100 people, there were multiple horses I had that I would have felt made a really interesting final table. And these 9 guys, again, not trying to be mean to them, but in terms of personality, I think this was the most boring final table out of them all in the modern era of poker. I mean, none of these guys were just super flashy. They seemed like nice guys, but nothing really about them captivated my attention very much. And I forgot about most of them, to the point that I even forgot Espen Jorstad when I was, go watching these episodes, taking my notes. I was like, what was the name of the winner again? Was it Espen? Like, I couldn't remember his name. And then it finally was like, oh yeah, it's Espen Jorstad. And that's in part because he doesn't feature into the edit until a lot later on, which we'll get into. But yeah, I mean, going into this, I had very low expectations. CBS's style, I just think is too insubstantial. I don't like skipping over the early days of the tournament. I don't like that there's no nuts equivalent. You know, there's just not much fun to, the edit of it. Doesn't feel like the editors are having fun. The producers are having fun. I mean, Lon and Norm, seem to do fine, but I want more of a personality presented within the edit, not just, what happens in a very dull fashion. And
yeah,
we'll
so
it's
funny because compared to 2021, 22, there are some substantial flaws, and I feel like there's more flaws that are less crushing compared to 2021. Like, I think we talked about in 2021 there was like 3 major flaws we had, and here I feel like there's like 5 like pretty major flaws. So even though they're not nearly as substantial, when you combine them all together, it makes for, again, a pretty weak main event. I guess I definitely think this averages out to a worse main event. and I put up maybe closer to where the 2018, 2019 stuff rings out. The thing is, there are really kind of like two or three components of this main event that I was really looking forward to watching. One was, of course, Zilong Zhang. Just what a great character he was in the live stream, and he is pretty prominent in this in 3 or 4 of these episodes, so that's great. And then also the final table, the unique dynamic of this final table, how day 7 was stretching out long, there was 10 left, what are we going to do, we're going to put down to 9, no one's busting, oh my god. And then from 10 to from 11 players down to 9, not even down to 8 really, I was really expecting some fun, like, oh my god, he's surviving all in again, oh my god, this didn't happen, all that. Those were the two, so Zhang and the final few bust outs before the final table kind of gets rolling were really two things I was locking in on, saying if they can nail those two elements, I'll be, I can't be too let down if they nail those two elements. And on Zhang's front, I think they get enough of Zhang in there to accomplish that benchmark. But then my second point there, I think it really did not work at all for me.
Yeah, I mean, we'll go through each of these episodes one by one, but yeah, I mean, the final table, like I said, it was very disappointing to watch live, given it was 9 guys I had no real attachment to. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of the same in the edit. I mean, it's hard trying to find, we understand that there's only so much that the editors can work with, right? If there's 9 bland people at the final table, there's only so much you can do to edit and make them entertaining. Obviously it would have been better for the coverage in 21 if George Holmes had beat Karai Aldemir, the underdog triumphs over the experienced tournament professional, and that didn't happen. This isn't scripted. We understand that. But I do feel like you have to work a little bit harder, dig a little bit deeper to come up with interesting footage, have interesting interviews with these players, get quotes that really get their personalities better. And if you can't find anything within the coverage to really work with, do things like the nuts, go goofy, be a little bit over the top, have, Phil Hellmuth come in and dress like a wizard or whatever you want to do, add a little bit more zip into the coverage if things don't work out in, the actual real life. So, I feel like these are lessons that the CBS producers and PokerGo should take moving forward. Never be afraid to just, have a little bit more fun.
Yeah, because it almost feels like rather than trying to build this like comprehensive narrative journey from, we'll call it, J to Z for the main event, because we're getting kind of halfway, they kind of go, they look at the short term. Well, okay, we have Mattisau at table 2 on day 4. We'll just show him a little bit. Okay, and then let's go on day 5. Zhang's there, so we'll show him a bit. Oh, Brian Kim has a lot of chips on day 6 and day 7, so we'll show him. But without really giving us every little nuance to those mini stories in this main event. So it's just a mush. It's just a mishmash of various things that happened during the main event, rather than giving us, giving us a little bit of Adrian Attenborough. Particularly with him, I feel like he really got a shit edit. He had just a crazy up and down chip journey those last 2 days, this day 7 and then the final table, and we really barely get any hint of that in the edit. He and Jorstad honestly get probably the least focus since, like, I feel like Eastgate and Demidov did in 08 as far as the final 2 in number of hands shown, until they're of course scoring off heads up, and they're gonna of course be together in playing hands with each other. That was pretty atrocious. And again, I just why don't we just get into the episode breakdown here, because I think it's hard to just sort of break this down about going over each one bit by bit. So episode 1, day 4, not even the start of day 4 though. This is a good 500-ish eliminations into the money section of the tournament on day 4. So we only have 833 players left as of the episode's beginning, when as 1,300 players had cashed. To my credit here, we have some pretty good names on the featured tables here. We have Damian Salas, who again is a pretty regularly featured character in this main event. We have Farah Galfand. Mattisau is on table 2, and John Sin and Marcel Lusk on table 3, which I should say felt arguably slightly better utilized in this main event compared to 2021. I mean, it was very subtle. Maybe just it looked like the hands were a bit better or something, but I felt that maybe it was like one notch better on the day 3 on table 3 action compared to the year prior. And this episode definitely emblematic of a lot of, like, not bits, but like mini bits, where the interviews pretty much the entire season are like literally maybe 10 to 15 seconds max, and they get maybe 2 sentences in about, oh, poker, I'm happy to be here, oh, it's so much fun. And then maybe like 1 in like 3 or 1 in 4 interviews, maybe talk about the players' like family life or other hobbies or background. And this episode has quite a few of those, and I just wasn't a fan of these interviews right off the bat of this main event.
Yeah, I like how the interviews are shot. Like they have a new setup and a new stage, and the lighting looks good and all that. But yeah, a lot of these interviews are very insubstantial. I mean, I think back to the old classic era that they actually let these interviews go on for 30 or so seconds. And you actually get to hear interesting stories from the contestants about what their lives are like and how they play poker and how poker came into their lives. And here it's just like, yeah, I play poker and I like my dog and I like my wife, and then that's about it. Very insubstantial. Also, throughout, we get both Kara Scott, and Jeff Platt, and they have this sort of section like "Stand Up for Me, Please," where they have these like graphics. And I thought that that little graphic of "Stand Up for Me, Please" was kind of neat. But then Jeff Platt only appears like 4 times throughout, and they only use those graphics like 2 or 3 times. So I was a little disappointed with how they did that sort of interview. And the Jeff Platt meme of him being the Grim Reaper, so to speak, doesn't really come up here. I think it was more 2023, but it would have been kind of nice to like maybe refer to that in some way. I don't know. And then Kara Scott is just her sort of standing there next to a television screen, and she'll talk about somebody who's at the feature table. Very sort of just basic stuff, supplying a couple of sentences to the audience, which is fine. But again, I feel like you can do more with that. Kara Scott's a decent interviewer. I think she has a good, she has a good presence, a good screen presence. So I think it'd be nice to use a little bit more of her.
Yeah, regarding Kara Scott, this has been a problem for a good number of main event years. It always seems like whenever she interviews someone, there's always this rush to end it. Like she always either cuts them off or like sort of artificially ends it early. And a lot of these interviews are happening in real time, and they want to get back to poker action. But I feel like there's got to be some way to maybe interview them live, not show it live, and then put it in the episode or something. That way, you get like if they want, if someone's busting in the main event in 35th place, they want to tell be able to say their full 4 thoughts here, not just 1.5 thoughts. So I don't know. I feel like I know that particularly with poker, I feel like other sporting events or other news things, I don't feel this happens nearly as often. Except maybe like at the end of like a 10-minute long interview break. Oh, we're gonna go commercial, so we gotta wrap things up. I don't know. That's something the back of my head always kind of bothered me a little bit.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I think they should give those interviews at least a minute to, again, let the player kind of calm down, give Kara some opportunities to ask some questions, and let the player, Kara, I keep saying Kara for some reason, give Kara some opportunities to ask, some actually interesting questions and elicit some interesting responses rather than, so you just bust it out. How do you feel? Which is just essentially 80% of these interviews. Right. Yeah, again, just give time for these segments to breathe a little bit. It's okay to have an interview go on a little bit longer. It's okay to have, a segment that's not specifically poker action, like the nuts, something like that. Mm-hmm. They're so focused on getting this action. And then these hands, I mean, aren't super interesting. I mean, nothing in this first episode really grabbed my attention in terms of great poker action. It really feels like a spark notes of this main event of, oh, we have to show these players, we have to show you these hands, but you don't get a sense of things building. I mean, a good example, this is the money bubble bursting. It's just shown in a quick montage. It's like the money burst. Here's everybody being happy about it. When this is such an intense moment, this is so cool to see play out. And I remember the golden era of, WSOP coverage. I mean, this would go on for, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. This whole money is about to burst. There's fewer than 100 players left before the money, and seeing how players change their strategies based on that, and who ramped up their aggression and who toned things down, who's folding pocket king because they want to make the money. Those little moments, again, they're not, I understand they don't contribute to who wins the main event. A lot of those players don't make the final table, but they're fun to see. So just let those play out.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the bubble on the final table, because Madison 05 was all in on the bubble and made the final table. So, and he's in this episode, so it's kind of funny there. The problem with this episode is because it begins with this artificial sort of part of day 4. We don't get a chance to really see kind of the rise and fall of Madison. He's shown in a couple hands on table 2, including his bust up hand, which he tried to defend on his podcast. Oh well, he's probably gonna. It looks so strong and stuff. And if they had began this episode on just the start of day 4 and just kind of just covered focused on Madison on table 2 for that part of the episode, and then maybe it could kind of end on his busting out, and then you could show Johnson and Marcel Lewis busting, on a sort of an ending montage of elimination. That could have been something, but because they didn't, we don't really get. It just kind of like, it's not quite a cameo of Madison, but it's like one Hollywood acting role notch like higher on the casting list for the episode, and so doesn't really leave any impact on me. Even, I mean, I knew this was coming because I remember the bust out from watching it live, but there could have been more to that because it is Mad Sow, and it is episode 1. It's kind of fun to get those old school players, in these modern main events as much as possible, especially for him who would cash in 4 straight main events.
Yeah, a good example of a cameo would be Zilong Zhang, who just essentially just pops up. He's just sitting at the table and he goes, "There's Zilong Zhang. The room is buzzing about him." And then we cut away.
Yeah.
Show us something about him. Show us why the room is buzzing. Don't just tell us, "Oh, everybody thinks this guy's interesting." Give us something to hang our hat on. I mean, we get that later on, but here in this first episode, you're trying to build this guy up through these next few episodes. Give us something so that we can latch onto it.
Yeah, and the only other bullet point I had in my notes here was that there was this female player at the first table who brought her dog into the poker room. I was really surprised. Like, A dog was in a casino. B, it was in the poker area. C, it was at the featured table. Like, that was like pretty crazy. I was like, I guess it's not in the rule book because no one would think to do that. I don't know.
I don't know either. Yeah.
You know, 1 player per hand, but I guess one living creature per hand. Is that a thing?
And you just let your dog play a hand while you go to the bathroom or
Yeah,
something.
like you teach the dog to like nudge some chips forward its nose. I can totally see that. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, there is that classic like dogs playing poker, like painting, art.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought the episode began off okay, giving us a little bit of fair go fun. The first hand was queens against aces. That's kind of, kind of crazy, I guess, but it kind of became too meandering afterwards. Episode 2, the last part of day 4, I think fared slightly better, I guess. I mean, Damian Salas and Aldemir are kind of given this like parallel, like the last 2 main event champions. How will they do? So that was kind of a cool little, tangential thematic tied to the 2 of the TV tables, but it's kind of dropped by the first third of the episode, unfortunately, at that point. And from there we get, we get to see, the usual panning of the outer tables. And again, there's a good number of players that I was rooting for at the time, following live, Brian Rast, Dan Smith, Gail Bowman. It's nice to have these players, but again, it's more just kind of like, where's Waldo than seeing them, play poker.
Yeah, I mean, here's the first episode where Zhang starts to get a pretty big edit, and it's kind of the Russell Hantz problem, where if you have an edit that's focused so much on one player, everybody else by exclusion is just going to not have as strong of an edit. And yeah, I mean, Dan Smith has moments. Aldemir gets interviewed, he has the moments, so we get to see little tastes of them, but then you just so much on Zhang. And yeah, he makes up for it by being a very entertaining player, but you have to have a balance here of Zhang and other players, especially early on when you have so many big names like Cliff Josephy is essentially just shown busting out. Like, let's see a little bit of him. I mean, he's a pretty good poker player. Let's see how he does.
Yeah, and I don't want to be accused of hypocritical thinking. Rigby had a big focus this year in the main event, and Zhang, in kind of in a similar, maybe a little bit longer, he was kind of day 2, 3, 4, 5 focus, whereas Zhang was more kind of 4 and 5 and a little bit of 6. And I kind of like having one person at the featured table, because then other players can come to the table later anyway. Like, Dan Smith joins Zhang. Rigby had Chance Cornuff. So it's not like, if you have one character, it makes the whole table monotonous because other players can join in. And again, with Zhang, day 5 is really kind of his main time to shine. So right. Day 4, he's in there, I guess, to kind of set the stage for the focus he'll get. And again, he had 3 million chips with the blinds, 10K, 15K, 10K, 20K. So again, a lot of chips. And I know I would certainly kill to have that stack on day 4, but there's a couple of interesting plays by Zhang for sure. He makes he calls a quarter of his stack a gut shot at one point. He gets Dan Smith to fold a chop pot again on a 4. A queen makes a straight on that 4. It's a tough spot for Dan Smith, obviously. And Zhang, both his play and his table talk is just really entertaining. I will give him that. Rigby, his play is entertaining. It doesn't talk as much, but so Zhang kind of has both halves of that, entertainment factor going for him. And again, it's a very scattered shot focus, in this day 4, just 2 episode collective here. And that, unfortunately, that scattered shot focus really kind of won't ever be shooken off by the edit in this entire main event. But I was, I guess, mildly more positive on episode 2 compared to episode 1, but again, still not, anything that is like, for me, like sort of average main event coverage.
Yeah, I mean, Zhang is very entertaining. Again, I'd seen him before, so I kind of knew what his antics were like. But
Yeah.
still, just things like, telling another player who's all in, cover your eyes, I'll tell you what the river's going to be. And then when the river's done, goes, oh my God, as a joke. I mean, just little things like that. And the nice thing about Zhang, too, is that he's not like, well, Kasuf, he's not really being mean. Yeah, he's using table talk and all that, but it's definitely with a facetious vibe to it. And everybody else seems to appreciate it. So that's one of the things that makes him entertaining, is that he definitely knows that he's the table captain. He knows that he's doing something differently than everybody else, and he's putting on a show for people, which is nice.
Yes. Which then gets us into day 5, which began with 380 players left. So getting down there a little bit. This first episode of day 5 covers 3 blind levels, and does give us Zhang back at the TV table with other players like Chambers Kuhn, who we know from the Heads Up Championship versus Doug Polk this year. We have Gail Bowman, twice the last woman standing in the field, and again one of the last few in this main event too. So again, very impressive for her. Table 2 gives us the start of day 5 chip leader, as well as Karai Aldemir. And I guess one thing I'll slightly give this main event credit is that it gave a little bit more attention to, oh, this player was the chip leader start of day 4, day 5, day 6, or was the chip leader right now and now is out. Something that was kind of a common thing maybe in the late 2000s main events for the most part, had kind of been not a major thing for a while. So I kind of appreciate that, I guess, to a small degree. And again, Damian Salas at table 3. So again, we have at least one person to kind of latch on to at all 3 of the TV tables, even if table 3 still maybe gets 1 or 1.5 hands on average of focus in the early episodes of this season.
Yeah, I mean, with table 3, they have to have RFID. They have to have chips. We have to see what the cards are. I think it's that simple. They don't have the cards, therefore they don't go to it. So what's the point of having a table 3 then if you don't have RFID? It doesn't really make much sense. So that, I mean, they need to do that moving forward. And it's a good point you make about the chip leader. I always find it fascinating who the start of day 4, day 5, day 6 chip leaders are, because they more often than not don't make it to the end. And it's kind of interesting to see what their journey is. And I do agree with you that there's a little bit more of an edit here, but I hope that in future seasons they can take that a step further and again really give us a sense of what these chip leaders' journeys are like. Because I mean, Dan Colpoys is at 6.3 million to start the day. I mean, that is holy shit. That's such a big stack. I mean, how did he get to there? What did he do with it? A little bit more information, but again, he's stuck on table 3, so as a result, we don't get that information that we could use.
Mm-hmm. And then the episode is a pretty heavy focus on table 1, as it usually is, but with Zhang there, obviously you're going to have a lot of focus. There's a lot of fun action on that table of Zhang. He's a couple kind of rivals at that table, Barfield, Nunley, and then Dan Smith will later join the table in the next episode. So there's some good stuff there. Zhang makes a 5-bet with Ace Jack that actually works against Ace King. He actually gets to 9 million chips with the blinds 20K, 40K, so like 225 big blinds. Chambers Kuhn, he cracks aces with 9s, and then his opponent gets an ace to end up losing that hand. Then he loses the next hand to Gail Bowman. So Kuhn, under the radar, one of the most consistent main event performers of the last 10 to 12 years. We first saw him in that 2012 main event, scoring off against Henry Tran on day 4, and since then, really, if I was going to do a main event fantasy poker league, he'd be one of my picks to be a safe bet to finish day 4, day 5, because he's really been one of the most consistent guys here.
Yeah, he doesn't get a lot of attention in the edit for that. So, I mean, he definitely should be recognized for his accomplishments.
Yeah. And then otherwise, Gail Bowman does bust in this episode, that she's busted now in the main event and now on the TV table, I think twice. And then she was on the outer tables against Keating in 2016 when she busted. So right. I guess you could say the TV table maybe a little unlucky for her. I don't know. But again, one of the more consistent female poker players in the world in the main event. So props to her as well for that accomplishment. Karai Aldemir, this kind of there's not too many like true stories. There's maybe like 5 stories in this main event, but one of them is Karai Aldemir's run / his ability to win flip after flip, and so we get a little bit of that on table 2 in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of stories being built, I mean, we have our first big sort of final tableist appearance with Dobrich toward the end of this episode. And it's just mentioned that, like, oh, yeah, here's this guy, Dobrich. He ran deep in the main event previously. He's got over 100 bigs, and that's it. Give us this guy. You know, this guy's going to make the final table. He was a contender to win the whole thing at the final table. I mean, especially in the early parts of that final table. Give us a little bit more to build off of, really tell this story out. It's okay to have Aldemir by all means and tell that story, especially because he won like 15 flips. You know, it's just crazy to see that. But you know, here's somebody that is a good poker player, has run deep in the main before. You know, is going to run deep in the main this time. Give us a little bit more here. Build this story out more.
Yeah, Dobrik, he's kind of like the inverse of Lococo, who had made the final table prior and then busts, on day 6. It kind of the inverse. That's kind of funny. And again, with the final table in particular, we know that the 9 players. I was, trying to see when are we going to see a hand of any of the 9. Like, it's not enough just to span the other tables and be like, oh, there's your steady one in the tag team event this year. That's not enough for me. I want to see a little bit of them. I understand that none of them are on the TV tables in days 4 and days 5, but I mean, you have all this footage. I'm sure they must have had something that they could have done better than that, than how they handled things. And if they didn't have any footage of them, then that just speaks to how, comparing to the classic main events, they still found ways to get these guys in the action in some capacity. So, I don't know how in the modern era of poker, broadcasting, how we can't, fix that problem here. One thing this episode did do a bit better was they had fewer bits. I didn't think that the majority of the bits were any good this season, so to have a fewer in this one, it was good to give us more poker focused action. But unfortunately, because we're compressing day 5 into just a couple hours of television here, a lot of day 5 gets skipped. There's so much action on that TV table in the first table number 1 that we see gaps of hands where we see Nunnally and Zhang's chip stacks are like fluctuating between the hands and the edit, so we don't get to see their full sort of roller coaster ride of a day 5. And so I was really caught off guard. Like, literally Zhang will lose a hand done up to 3 million. Next time he's at 8 million. Like, does not work.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to show an up and down like that in a montage, but there's a couple ways you can do it. I mean, just give us sort of a very brief, Zhang did this on the river and he was called. Zhang did this on the river and he wasn't called. I mean, you can just do like a quick montage of all of that. I understand it's, again, going to be a little tricky. It's not going to be perfect, but give us something to go off of beside just, the chip stacks at the top of the screen. Because, yeah, that stood out to me the entire time, especially with the final table, that there was so much action and so many chips exchanging hands, and that we just didn't get that really told to us in a proper fashion.
Absolutely. I think I'm good to move on to episode 4 if you are. The back half of day 5. And again, I feel like day 5 could have been, 3, even 4 episodes of just table 1 focus, I actually really like this table 1 action on episode 4, probably some of the best action of the whole season. Just more Dan Smith, Zhilong Zhang, Nunnally, Barfield, a lot of just really crazy action. And but then just with such dull action on tables 2, table 3, and even the outer tables, that it's just one of the more polarizing episodes I've ever had watching of the main event and the entire, like the hundreds of episodes we've watched. Probably the most polarizing I've ever felt about one episode was this episode.
Yeah, I mean, Zhang is just such an interesting player to watch, especially against somebody like Dan Smith. I mean, let's again really let this let's let this breathe. Let's let this stretch out. Let's see a lot about this. And yeah, I mean, there's a couple other interesting moments beside that. There's the Rebay Lococo hand, which lasts for nearly 20 minutes because Rebay is taking. And Rebay also gets a very interesting edit. I mean, he's one of the players who gets a massive edit, is talked about repeatedly over and over again with his antics. He got such a big edit. And again, I forgot everyone at the final table. I thought he made the final table. I totally forgot that he didn't make it. I mean, the edit, I'm kind of glad for that. The edit sort of threw me through a loop. But yeah, I mean, it's, not that his antics are, bad or anything, but it's like, it's kind of weird that he got such a big edit in comparison to Zhang, whose antics are, I think a more prominent and more entertaining. But anyway, I mean, beside that, I mean, yeah, the big problem that I have with this episode would be the montages. There's 2 different montages. There's a montage of footage we had just seen in the previous episode of Zhang versus Smith. And then there's another like Zhang montage at the end that was just sort of like a bunch of just moments of Zhang talking, and, playing hands and stuff. And it's like, there were so many montages this season, and they took up so much time of moments that we had just seen in the last episode or even earlier in the episode. Cut these two moments out. You want to go over it briefly with the narration, that's fine, but give us another hand of Zhang, and so we can really see his table presence and what he was like as a player.
Yeah, there weren't too many montages up until this episode, and then this just begins a trend of there's so many montages and flashbacks, and again, of very recent footage. And I'm not too certain of how these episodes were broadcasted on CBS Sports Network, but if it was one a week or two a week, or I don't know, maybe alternating one here, two there. But I mean, I imagine even if you hadn't seen this main event live and it's just your only way of experiencing it, you'd be pretty annoyed by these flashbacks. And again, like, at least give us maybe like a director's cut flashback. Like if you're going to show us a 10-second clip, show us like 15 seconds, like an extra 5 thrown in there, or just something to spice things up that it wasn't something we've just seen. And again, flashbacks, in reality TV or sports where you've just seen it. And again, they almost always bug me, and this didn't do anything to dissuade me. And again, these are all regular like 44-minute episodes, so it's not like we had like the filler of 2016 or 2015 where they had those hour and a half long episodes, so they had to find ways to pad things out. You don't need to. There's some pretty good poker action in this main event that they could have really focused on a bit more. There were hands of lengthy tanks and stuff that they could have showed more clips from. The Lococo hand you mentioned with Rebay, 17-minute long hand after the flop ran out, like from the flop onward, it was 17 minutes, and we only to the very end of it. And it's obviously Lococo, shows the bluff, and it's pretty crazy. But you could have shown us a little bit longer of that hand and got rid of the montage.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, especially because Lococo's from the previous year. He has a bit of a public profile. He's one of the more famous people to run deep in the main event. He's got like nearly 1 million Twitter followers. Hype this up a little bit, and then Rabay's going to get a big edit. Hype this up a little bit and really let us see this hand progress. I mean, 17-minute tanks don't happen very often. That we do get a later 17-minute tank. Let's see, give me a little bit of context. Don't just give me narration. Let's just actually see the circumstances that led up to this.
Yeah, and it was really, besides that hand being, pretty cool and all, with table one's action being like, in my books, some of the best action of this entire season, then everything else being kind of the worst, some of the just more dull action. Again, a very hot and cold episode. I still thought it to be the best of the four up until this point. Just on table one, we have Nunnally busting Barfield of queens against aces on the very first hand shown. Zhang beats kings of 8-6, and then the Dan Smith and Zhang rivalry just so good. I mean, at one point, Zhang just says, what the heck? He calls a Dan Smith shove of 8 deuce while he's in the big blind, and then there's this pretty crazy run out, back and forth. So and then Dan Smith has 2 pair and then cannot make a fold against Zhang's nut straights. I would have folded personally, by the way, and just some great action there that I really was happy to see. Even though I had watched it once before, it was fun to see it here again.
Yeah, the Queen 4 versus Ace Deuce hand. I mean, that was just so much fun to see the two of them interact with each other. It's just such a surreal combination of Dan Smith, this storied professional, and then Zilong Zhang, this guy who just comes in out of nowhere and takes control of this main event. It's always fun to see interactions like that, and I appreciate that they let that hand in particular play out.
Absolutely. And technically, I did think that this was the best of the 4. So I guess if the chart, the graph of quality, it's technically going up a bit. I thought 2 and 4 were the best 2 of the first 4. With episode 5, we get entirely into day 6. And whereas the first 2 days we saw were 2 episodes each, day 6 gets 4 episodes to fully breathe, because we're playing from 122 players down to the final 35. And that takes some time, obviously, with the chips consolidating and everything. And unfortunately, I found this to be a very dull episode, made only worse by the fact that all these action hands were just put in this really quick montage at the end of the episode. I just couldn't believe it. I thought these are like prime hands to show us some great action, and they just totally skipped them.
Yeah, and also part of it is that Zilong Zhang's wheels just completely fell off. And I mean, the magic was, everybody knew what his game was about. It's one of the problems about being such a conspicuous player like him, is that everybody's looking at you. Well, then everybody knows what you're doing, and things just don't work out. Also, I mean, he just got some bad cards and some bad runouts. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of felt very anticlimactic to have this big player who's been edited for so much and hyped up at the start of this episode, and then all of a sudden, it just falls apart.
Yeah. That we do a couple of players that I have some, notes about, Stanley Lee, who I mentioned a while ago, that was one of the main characters of a documentary we reviewed last year. I had watched this randomly and I remember, oh my God, he made it to the top, 100, whatever, in the main event. That's right. Here he is. He busts on table one, but again, it was just kind of cool to have him pop up here when he's, again, his two poker mainstays have always been the Millionaire Maker in the main event. And so it's just kind of cool to see him continue that trend in 2022.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Kenny Tran, our favorite 2007 play, kind of one of the MVPs of that year for sure. Returning into the spotlight here. Again, he'd kind of vanished from the main event scene since I think cashing in 08. We hadn't really seen him in any episode prior to this one. And he's a part of just he's not at the table yet, but this guy Kogel joins the TV table a bit later, and that will form one of the one few noteworthy poker interactions of this whole main event. But unfortunately, the hands shown on table one are probably some of the most boring, like normal hands I've ever seen ever on table one, up until there's one hand at the very end where jacks against queens against aces go all in. Besides that one hand, it was just some of the most vanilla, boring cut and paste hands you'll ever see in a main event at table one.
Yeah, having said that, Kenny Tran's table talk is just phenomenal. I think he's the funniest player featured in this whole main event. Just out of nowhere, him remind me of a very famous movie star, Borat, when he's talking to Lakoko. That just made me laugh out loud. I'm reading over my notes right now, and I'm laughing at just thinking about it because it just comes out of nowhere. And then the running gag of him. When a player is all in, calling for certain cards to appear on the flop, which it's just so funny, like that he's just willing to do this, and that other players actually start to get irritated at him is just even funnier. We also have Lakoko rapping, and I thought he did a pretty good job rapping. And that's my favorite interview of the whole season. It's just his rap. I thought he did a pretty good job with how smooth the flow was. I don't speak Spanish, but I thought.
No español. Okay, está bien. Yeah. Well, again, it's kind of funny how the quality of these poker raps has kind of continued to climb. Like we had Palad Freeman, then we had what's his name, the guy that busted Red Merce in 2012. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And then Lococo's rap in the year prior, and then Lococo in this one. So it's kind of funny. Maybe by 2025 we'll have a really good rap. I don't know. On the outer tables, we do get the top two stacks to start day 6 was this guy named Hobbs, who was chip leader, and then Litsu. Effie Litsu, one of the last ladies in the field, was second in chips to begin day 6, which is pretty crazy. And then, unfortunately, with Zhang busting, we get 2 more montages of him. So he's showing like 2 hands this episode, and then there's 2 more montages. So I made like 5 or 6 montages of Zhang in like only 2.5 hours of TV span, which is pretty crazy. There was a Northeastern joke dropped by Norman. I went there for school, so I was kind of amused by that, I guess. There are a few okay Norman Lawn topics or combos here and there. That was one of them for me. But again, what really hurt me was how boring table one was to start off with, and then just that action of those action hand bust out montage 2/3 in, when we should have seen those hands happen. I'm sorry. I'll never forgive this episode for doing that to us.
Yeah, I mean, what else is there to talk about on table one here? I mean, I'm looking over my notes, you're looking at these hands. I mean, just nothing that's even really worth bringing up in passing. If you're going to do a montage like that at the end, you have to show us one of them. How about just one of them at substance instead of like 6 of them in quick succession in a row and we barely get anything.
Totally agree with you. And when Shelby Wells does best, she was a player that we saw on day 1 playing up Negreanu in this main event in Vegas. So kind of cool to see her in action, even if she does bust, leading Litsu as the last lady standing in the field. Episode 6, the second part of day 6, does I'd say slightly better than episode 5. Nothing to move the needle, but a few okay hands shown here. There's only 16 bust outs in the 2 levels covered by this episode, so a little bit slower action. Aldemir goes to the featured table. His tail defense does come to an end here in 75th, but again, very impressive. Especially considering how the quality of poker play continues to increase year to year. To finish in, besides Raymer, whose field was maybe a couple thousand players smaller, still again one of the most impressive total defenses of main event history.
Yeah, it's certainly the most impressive defense of the last 10 years, absolutely, and I think the most impressive since Raymer. I mean, and he did very well throughout. I mean, he wasn't like um, he was gifted the 75th place finish. He really had to work for it. And yeah, he hit a lot of flips and hit a lot of lucky spots, but he really is a very talented player, and he got third place for Player of the Year this in 2022. I mean, he's no slouch to say the least.
Yes, absolutely. And this episode does function kind of as a mini intro to Brian Kim and Effie Litsu because they are featured in tables 1 and tables 2. So that, I guess, and we see some of the final 10 finally in action here, which, 6 episodes into 15 episodes, we see a couple of them, here and there a touch, not like, more than one hand if even shown at all. Lococo at the final table as well. Brian Kim, Kenny Tran, Kogel, who again takes issue of trans table talking again. That this kind of gets some attention. It's as close to a Rystad Karen and fight of a fight that's not quite a fight that we've gotten in a while besides Kasuf, I guess. But again, it's nothing too major. But again, it's just a small little amusing thing happening in the background as the day 6 action happens.
Yeah, I mean, Kenny Tran has my favorite moment of the episode after Aldemir busts. He doesn't recognize Karai Aldemir, which is just, is kind of funny. There's all these just weird little, socially awkward moments involving Kenny Tran that I just find really fascinating. I mean, yeah, I can understand it can be a little irritating to hear Tran call these cards out, but I mean, it's all in good fun, right? I mean, the other players don't seem to be upset, so what's the big deal there?
I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
There's a couple of pretty big hero calls in this episode with small pocket pairs. Bitar on our table is hero calls Hobbs, who was again the chip leader as day six began with pocket threes, pretty crazy. And then Kuntz on table 2, who watches One Piece by the way, which is pretty cool. It makes a hero call of pocket fours on not the scariest board, but definitely a board where your fours are not looking to put a lot of chips in the middle. So again, pretty impressive stuff. And again, a couple of okay hands here. Those were a couple of them. But again, so a meh episode, but nothing that would change my opinion of the whole season, but it was okay.
Yeah.
Whereas now, as we get into the back half of day 6, with episode 7, playing down to 48 players, again, they kind of keep the featured tables more or less the same. There's just players busting and then the spots being filled up at that point. There's a lot of interviews and flashbacks that are just continue to be boring, which kind of drags things down. We get our first spot with Matt Sue, who will be a final tableist. And oddly enough, there were 0 bust outs in the first half of this episode. But because of that, it's more just giving us a few hands that don't know about bust outs, obviously, but nothing that made me super excited, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, they did do this weird thing with Eddie Sabat over this episode and the previous one. They tried to make him he's a fan favorite, he's a goofy guy, he's fun, but we barely see him. We're just kind of told oh, he's a fan favorite. Then he busts. It's we don't really why did you spend all that time trying to hype this guy up? You could have. I guess you have to show him. I don't know. I mean, I don't think you need to. You could just had a couple more hands with Dobrich becomes the chip leader with 20 million. As you mentioned, we have Matthew Seuss show up. Give us something with them because they're going to make the end. I mean, be conservative with your time here, and it's just so strange to have all these montages and have all this stuff to fill time, and yet there's so much stuff that you're leaving out that should have attention.
Yeah, I mean, there was my two main thoughts of this episode is one is I like the kind of the fourth wall joke of we're not going to show a feature and then knock him out, right? With Rosen, he gets a double up. It's kind of a fourth wall joke, sort of. Which kind of blurs the lines of what is fake and what is real, and then he doubles up again, and then they do it again with Dobrik, which is kind of funny. And then besides that, again, they're really trying to ramp up this Coco Tran fight is so crazy, flashing back to the episode prior, and it's it's pretty minute drama to be really at this point. It's not. It's they're trying to make it seem like this is Kasuf level activity where it's really kind of middling at best. And so it's kind of when someone gets overly excited about something that's kind of meh.
Yeah, I mean, the pinnacle of dramas between two players for me at the main event would be Matisow versus Sean Chacon, where it really seemed like they hated each other, even though Matisow says we're actually really good friends in real life. And again, they spent so much time hyping this up. They did start off the conflict by saying these two people don't like each other, but then they let the hands play out and let the back and forth play out. Versus this just felt very manufactured to me. Yeah, as I just mentioned, yeah, it can be a little bit irritating, but all the other players seem fine with it. I don't understand why this guy, whose name I can't even remember, frankly, Kogel, I think is his name. I don't understand like why he's so bothered by it. It's not a big deal.
I know, especially since he wasn't all in for any of these hands, just kind of
Yeah.
watching. But in any case, again, late day six action kind of gets a bit more intense by default. So I kind of felt those vibes a little bit watching this episode as I was winding down, but really, nothing more besides that. Episode 8 concludes day 6, getting it down to the magic 35 players. I know, they didn't expect to be done 27 by this point. And it covers just one blind level, the 125K, 250K level. And Lococo meets his end on table 3, which is kind of gross because table 3 is just kind of boring in this main event. So it was an unsatisfying end to really who should have been one of the main focuses of this main event. Anytime a final table is making it to the final 4, 5, 6 tables, they should be given the proper amount of attention. Salas and Aldemir did get that, to be fair, but Lococo and Aldemir squared off in that hand that really changed the tide of that entire final table. And so you kind of want to see that get the right level of dedication that it did not receive.
Yeah, I mean, Damian Salas, sort of bobs and weaves through this whole coverage. He's shown doubling up here. We don't really get much of a sense of, was he short the whole time? What sort of hands was he making? We're told about him a lot, but we're not really shown about him a lot. And instead of him, we get, players like Bajani, who's just like out of nowhere, just gets this edit, which again, I just find very weird. It's like Eddie Sabat, just out of nowhere, they're going to give this random player who, yeah, like Bajani seems like a nice guy. There's a couple of kind of fun moments here in this episode, but in the long run, in the grand scheme, in terms of telling the story of, a player like Lococo who pulled off this big back-to-back feat, one of the final tablists, can't you just save moments for them instead of these random guys who only pop up in 2 episodes and bust quickly and, aren't terrific poker players, to be frank? It's again, conservation of detail here is what I'm asking. So
I mean, I think if anyone's watched us is tallying the names of who we're talking about, we haven't mentioned the final 10 in a hand really once yet. And here we are at over the halfway point of this, this coverage here. There's a couple of interesting hands though that did take place regarding sort of like poker no-nos or like poker faux pas, where Bojani turns his hands over in celebration after we thought he had gotten, the hand was kind of the action was done, and it doesn't change the action after he does that, and he doesn't even get a penalty for exposing his hand in the middle, and his card's in the middle of a hand. Like I couldn't believe that. We've seen players get like 1 round penalties or 1 hand penalties for things that I think are much less, severe at that. So I was always surprised by that, especially with 4 tables left in the main event. You'd think that that the benchmark for etiquette would be pretty high. And then there was a hand where someone didn't see a raise all in the action left. They missed one part of the table moving around, action moving around. So then it results in Brian Kim knocking out a short stack as a result with that. So that was interesting. Besides that, Litsu does get a double up with 2 jacks against Brian Kim's aces after flopping a set. That gets her up to 18 million, which is, again, a very nice stack. Unfortunately, we only get to see the hand from the flop onward. I would have liked to have seen, how she handled having a big pocket pair of action pre-flop. Because again, Litsu, we really barely see her in action. And I remember her play very vividly from that main event. And she actually kind of reminded me of John Hesp a bit with her bet sizing and her hand selection. It really did. And I wouldn't have ever have guessed that if I'd only watched her on this in this season of episodes.
Yeah, it's just so weird, the stutter step approach they have to characterization, just peppering these moments throughout for players like Litsu, giving them little interview segments, but none of them are of real substance. It just feels like breadcrumbs leading you down a path, but not enough substance for anything else. It's just there's a hint of characterization, but not actual characterization.
Yeah, and there was a montage of bust outs after a pay jump was reached in this episode. And I was like, just show us the bust out hands. I mean, I think I recall from 2021, they did do a pretty good job of giving us bust out, seeing us each one in sequence from episode beginning to episode ending. And they couldn't even do that in this case. And luckily, with being down to only 4 or 5 tables, there's very little action happening on the outer tables to pan out to. But Antoine Labat actually bust to Rebbe with holding aces. So Labat just, if aces are involved in the hand, he is just not going to be happy. So, but again, another final tableist that makes a deep run here. And again, this is the first time we've seen the whole main event too. So kind of gross.
Yeah, it's weird how they just didn't even get a mention. I mean, you'd think they would just, want to show very quickly the kings, aces hand just to be like, hey, remember this guy? This was a fun poker moment. It's just very strange characterization.
Yeah, it all kind of amounts to probably, in one of the weakest day 6 episode collections we've had. Maybe 2019 was worse. I'm not sure. At least I had Sam Greenwood's fall at the very end. I don't know. And it's something I know is that there are a few times where Lon announced the bet sizing wrong.
Yeah.
Where because by this point they've gotten rid of the 5K chips. So any increment of betting has to be 25K. So 25, 50, 75K, 100K even. And at one point they said like 80K. Because I think on the graphics they rounded up. If someone bet like 1,175,000, they made it 1.18 instead of 1.175. So I know it's kind of strange that they would do that. I mean, again, it's one of those small like ADD moments I'll notice that no one else notices, but I was kind of bugged by that too.
Yeah, they should make that consistent.
So with going to day 7, so we have 7 episodes left, 4 covering day 7, 3 covering the final table, which has kind of been the new norm ever since I think 2019 did that. With day 7, again, watching this live, I had a few horses left in the race. Obviously, I had Kenny Tran, I had Litsu. I don't think I really had, I think it's Damian Salas too. Those were kind of my big 3. And episode 1 of day 7 is probably one of the most rushed and uninvolved episodes we've ever seen on day 7 in a long time. They have 11 bust outs covered, and it just nothing really gets to sink. You don't really get to caught up in the drama of day 7 really at all in this episode.
Yeah, there's no sense of tension. There's no sense of, the short stacks have to chip up while the big stacks have to preserve their stature. I mean, it's just very breathless. Bajani busts and Blazovic busts and all these players bust, but there's no sense of emotion. There's no sense of like, oh my God, these players are gone. And yeah, we start to finally get, Espen Jorstad and Jeff Farnes and Ames shows up, and we're starting to finally get our, 9 into focus here, a little bit of focus, because not that much at all. We're just told Jeff Farnes is the chip leader, and then that's it. We're just told Espen Jorstad is here. Who is Espen Jorstad? And that's it. Like what is this supposed to be the focus of this? What am I supposed to get out of these moments being presented to us? It just doesn't add up why they had the edits done like this.
Yeah, and there's a couple. I mean, I have a few things. There was this big hand between Brian Kim and Rebbe, where they each put a 9 million pre-flop, and these are again 2 of the top, 2 or 3 stacks at this point. Start day 7, and Rebbe has ace-5 suited, and Kim has queens. And this is one of the few hands where I think it does warrant some discussion of what would you have done here, what would I have done there. And I don't blame Kim for the queens fold. If you have no clue what Rebbe's playstyle is, I mean, that raise to 9 million pre-flop looks so strong. And with the flop, that's 10 high. So really, the only hand you're beating is a jacks or ace king, like suited.
Yeah.
And so it's a really tough spot with Kim. And you have so many chips that you probably don't feel like you have to risk, there are 100 plus big blinds with queens on a maybe that you're ahead here. So I don't blame the fold, but I also think that, Rebbe, it just kind of comes down to, do you know your enemy here? And I think Rebbe at this point had still been kind of an unknown. He hadn't been at one of the TV tables yet, so that probably was a big factor for Kim.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the fact that he asked, where are you from, suggests that Kim wasn't super familiar with Rebbe. I mean, yeah, Mermelstein raised to 600, then Rebbe makes it 1.6, then Kim makes it 5.25, then Rebbe makes it 9.25. I mean, based off of that, yeah, I mean, I'd be thinking Rebbe has aces, kings, etc. I don't think he's doing that with tens or weaker. So yeah, I mean, I understand the fold from Kim, but yeah, I mean, it's easy again us to see the cards in retrospect, thinking back on this, what we would have done. But I don't blame him for the fold.
Yeah, and even after folding, he still has a very healthy stack, and he wins the very next hand to kind of get most of those shits back anyway. So it wasn't like he was down. And Kim was kind of one of the more featured, prominent characters in the day 6 episodes, especially towards the end. He had a lot,
Mhm.
a lot of chips. He was knocking players out. We had a couple interviews, so he was kind of, not main character, but he was kind of getting a bit more attention. And with that many chips, you'd think that, even if he busts out early, we'll probably see that fall, and then it'll, at least, leave an impact us as viewers, which doesn't really happen, unfortunately. And one of the worst, probably one of the worst things I've ever seen in the main event on day 7 in my life is seeing a bust out hand happen over the guys doing the ad sponsorship after a commercial break. That was it drove me batty, and they keep doing it. They kept doing it. It just, oh my god, that drove me crazy.
Yeah, it's a very strange choice. I mean, why? I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, if you want to show this in the coverage and give it some attention, call attention to it. You can have Lon and Norm just say, John Smith busted in 33rd place to Jane Smith. Just, give us a little bit something more of substance rather than, I mean, imagine these players who ran this deep and they want to see themselves in the main event, and they just see their only appearance or one of their very few appearances is that. It just must have rubbed them the wrong way.
Yeah, and Farnes was, again, the start of day 7 chip leader. The guy who was in last place, Johnson, was out first. Not first, one of the first out on day 7. And all the other bust outs. Damian Salas does meet his end once they do a 3-table redraw with 27 players left. And one thing they did change starting in this main event was they altered the payouts so that instead of it being a pay jump once the tables consolidate, it was one bust out after. So normally it'd be 27th place to be a pay jump. They made it the 26th spot, and there's a pay jump, which I actually kind of like, because then when you're down to less than only a few tables, and you're playing shorthanded for a little bit longer than you would before, tanking and the uneven table sizes does play a role. So I'm actually okay with that being a change up there.
Yeah, I'm okay with that as well.
Unfortunately, again, 2 of my 3 horses fall victim to busting on what would have been a pay jump in years prior, both Litsu and Salas, but nonetheless, still a lot of money. But it kind of bugged me with them get a few extra $1,000 here and there. But I guess Salas can afford not to get a few extra $1,000 from this pay jump here. Once they redraw to the 3 tables, table 2 is really kind of the wrecking ball. There's 3 bust outs on that table. Mm-hmm. And on table 1, something that doesn't really get much attention is that Rebay has almost the entire table combined out chipped, which is pretty nutty. That didn't really get much focus because it doesn't maintain that for super long, but about an episode worth of time it does maintain it. He has like 50, 60 million, and everyone's got like 9, 10, 13 million. So I was surprised that it didn't show more of that.
Yeah, I mean, with Rebay, he gets a very odd edit. He just gets this very goofy presentation, and we don't learn a whole lot about, oh, he's a crazy poker player, but like we don't really learn about what his consistent thinking was. There's no interviews to explain, okay, this is why I made this move, this is why I made this bet size. It would have been interesting. We just get information like he's been working since 1996 on some project he can't talk about, which very ominous. Apparently it's out now. I don't know. It was scheduled to be out now. I don't know if it is or not. Yeah, I mean, just Rebay gets a pretty consistent characterization, and yeah, he's fun to watch, but I would have liked to get a little bit more of a concrete sense of who he actually was and who he actually became as a poker player throughout this main event, and we don't really get that.
I agree. And again, it just was amounted to a very bad, again, at day 7, when you're on the 3, 4 tables, 2 tables, this is really your chance to not only spotlight characters that will run into the final table, but also give us the few that you have focused on leading up to this point in the tournament. And we don't have any of those players at this point. And so again, I just didn't care for, we don't know these players. We don't really care for these players. So it really kind of hurt my entertainment value here. Going to episode 10 here, part 2 of day 7, we're 24 players playing down to the final 2 tables. That's just still too many players that we just barely know. And as a result, the action suffers as a result of that. And I put in bold letters here, the edit for Kim is the biggest joke I've ever seen. He literally has like 30 plus million in one episode. We cut back to him, he's on like 4 million, then he gets busted right off the bat. Like we don't see any chance of his sort of fall from glory.
Yeah, and they really hyped him up too. They're like, Norm was making jokes about how he's got second place energy vibe. He's going to make the final table, all that. To the point that, again, because I forgot who the final table was, I thought he made the final table along with Rebay. Like I completely forgot. And yeah, I don't mind that sense of misdirection. It kind of reminds me of Scotty Wynn in 2007 hyping him up, being like he's going to go to the final table when then he busts in 11th. But they showed Scotty Wynn falling apart, so that's what made that really land. Versus, yeah, I mean, Kim all of a sudden goes from a big stack to a short stack, and we don't see why. We get a lot of interviews with him. We get a lot of Kara Scott talking about him. So you're willing to talk about him this much. Why don't you show some of his poker play? It just doesn't make sense.
I totally agree. And something that I really like to see on day 7 is getting a sense of how each table is, the atmosphere of each table. Is there a lot of bluffs happening? Is the action crazy? Getting a sense of each table. And because we cut around so much and we don't know players very much, I never felt as if we got to know the dynamics around the tables. Rebay had a huge chip stack. We could have seen him try to bully the table. Didn't really see that. We just kind of see him losing 20 million chips off screen, and all of a sudden he's only got 30 million chips now. You don't get the chance to see him, play his game or lose or win. And on day 7, that's something I really want to see.
Yeah, I mean, they present the chip stacks at the end. I mean, Dobrich is up to 78 million. We've seen him pop up a couple times. We barely know anything about his play. Sue's at 45 million. We barely know anything about him. Attenborough is at 40 million. We barely know anything about him. Setna's at 37 million. Who the heck is Setna? I have no idea who that is. I mean, going over these names, it's like, okay, Rebay is the only one that we've really, only big stack who we really have seen to any significant extent. Henry Tran, yeah, I mean, not Henry Tran, Kenny Tran,
Yes.
Yeah, we've seen him sometimes too. But like so many other people are just unknowns. It's the edit and just what they decide to focus on is just so strange. It just doesn't make sense.
And we still had yet to see Jorstad or Attenborough play a hand really.
Yeah.
And even guys like Dweck, who are the final couple players, we've just haven't seen it all. Dweck probably gets more focus than Attenborough and Jorstad do at this point.
Yeah.
Otherwise, again, we have more montages of old stuff. Oh, great train montage on day 6. We literally just saw that. Again, it's just frustrating to see these montages and flashbacks happen so often.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, we get another elimination during ad spot, unbelievably, with only 6 bust outs occurring over the time of this episode. You'd think you could see all 6 of them, but no, we have to, cram it in there. When other episodes that didn't do that, they just have like old footage, montaging over this episode's brought to you by, groan.
Yeah, it's just very odd. I don't get it.
Which gets us to episode 11, the final 2 tables playing from 18 down to 15. And with this episode, it's the pace slows down a little bit more because we have fewer bust outs, and so that makes the action ever so slightly better. We do finally see Jorstad and Attenborough in action, even if it's most just all in hands involving Jorstad. There's a pretty big hero call on the very first hand shown that this is like one of the top 5 hands on that video on YouTube by PokerGo of day 7's action, the Attenborough hero call of top pair against Dobrich. That was pretty good. It did get Attenborough into the chip lead as well as that big hand.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit of foreshadowing with, what to come at the final table with Attenborough. Attenborough seems like, from the little clips I've seen of him, he seems like a really interesting player and an interesting person. Maybe it's just, Australian, just as an American, we find Australians just entertaining. I don't know. Steve Irwin, I don't know. But he strikes me as an interesting player. So I'm just surprised to see how small the edit he gets. Jorstad doesn't seem to be as flashy of a personality, but we finally get him playing a hand here, and it's busting, it's busting Litsu of all people. I mean, it's just like, that he's going to win. That he, is involved in, some, one of the craziest tanks in the history of poker. Give us some more with him. It's okay if you don't have to have interviews with them, but let's just see, like, he was a pretty top stack throughout this entire day. Really didn't seem to make too many errors. Let's see that from him. Let's build him up a little bit. And you can contrast him with people like Kim, who's, was a big stack and then busted out, and Rebay, who also busted out in this episode. You can contrast him with them. Like, here are these players who have these bigger stacks than he does, but they bust, versus he's just like a, stealth bomber slipping under the radar the whole time. That would have been interesting to see.
I totally agree with everything you just said. and Litsu does bust on the second hand, not second hand, one of the early hands shown with ace 10. I think maybe shoving a little bit too light there with too many big blinds. You know, the old like limp, the guy raises, you reshove over him. I'm always afraid of that spot there. I don't like it. Obviously 18th place is fantastic. It, you know, only falls behind Tiffany Michelle and Gail Bowman as far as last women's. I guess that's what held too for a women's finish in the main event. I was really, you know, let down by that bust out. I was really hoping she could at least make the pay jump to 17th place. And unfortunately, Kenny Tran gets busted in pretty swift fashion right afterwards. He gets unable to fold a overpair to the board against Kuntz, loses most of his chips, and then busts out. And you know, Rebay is the other bust out. So unfortunately, three of the more entertaining or more important people in this field are all gone in this episode.
But hey, we find out that Duzak really likes seafood. Yeah, I mean, Duzak finally appears, and it's just like, this is how you choose to introduce him.
That's pretty bad. I know I did make my old note where, you know, 5 of the top 9 with 18 left would make the final table, which I guess maybe I would have guessed maybe 6, because that's usually kind of the sweet spot there with 18 left. But you know, that's just kind of how it goes. Attenborough, after doubling up through Dobrik, he unloads a multiple barrels of bluffs to Kuntz, who becomes the chip leader at that point, which is something I didn't expect. That's Kuntz doesn't even make the final table. And then, of course, Kuntz has to take those chips and then completely dump it to Jorstad and Ace King against Ace's hand, where it's a 90 million chip pot pre-flop that kind of sets the tone for it to being Jorstad's world, and there's all living in it.
Yeah, I mean, that was just crazy. I mean, what are you doing when Jorstad raises you to 11.8? I mean, you have to, I understand Ace King's a powerful hand, but I mean, come on, you got to get rid of that one.
Exactly. And if Ace King, it's a great hand, but you're never dominating your opponent. So you're either hoping that it's a flip or that they just fold. And normally, if you know Jorstad, I don't think. I mean, we don't know what his reputation was. Was he a bluffer? Was he a tight player or in the middle there? But I definitely, if I'm in the final 2 tables of the main event and I have Ace King, I'm happy, but I'm not going crazy with that many chips. With that many chips. If I have fewer chips, okay, fine. I'll go all in and play big blinds. But with that many chips, no. But otherwise, there was a hand where players had an exactly identical chip stack before the hand started. That was pretty crazy. Diaz and Rebay, and they were playing each other. So if they'd been all in, it would have been exactly out, which is hilarious. Rebay's bluff does fail, which does lead to him busting. But again, that's just a small little detail that's kind of funny too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, there are a couple of pretty big hands, which is good, but it still pales in comparison to some of my favorite all-time episodes in Day 7 that this would not compare well to.
Yeah, and it leads into episode 12, which, yeah, I just found very dull. I mean, again, it's Day 7 is just such an interesting day to let play out. And I mean, to just have these bust outs, which aren't really that interesting, and to not get any sense of, they had to stop 10-handed because everybody was so tired. There's no sense of fatigue. We're just kind of told, oh, by the way, everyone's tired, so we're stopping coverage. It would have been interesting to see that as a motif woven throughout these episodes, but we don't get that.
Yeah, and of the 5 players that got knocked out in this episode, I feel like I guess Rosen was probably the most focused on up until this point before, and maybe Kuntz was second. And then I guess Diaz isn't involved though in a pretty epic hand though that goes into the commercial break, and the Ace Queen against Farns's King hand that was absolutely wild for me to watch when it happened live. Very impressive folds. I guess. When I first saw the hand, I was like, oh my God, amazing fold. When I watched it again, I'm like, it's a good fold, but I can see the wheels turning where I might find myself a way to fold that too. But again, a very good hand, definitely one of my favorites of this main event too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really spectacular hand because, again, they let it play out. We really see the wheels turning. And, Diaz is, again, another one of these sort of 2-episode wonders where they just decide to throw in this guy for 2 episodes. And he's probably my favorite of the 2-episode wonders. He does seem like a decent player, and he seems like an interesting guy too. So it was kind of nice to see that moment.
And, I saw him in Vegas this year, so it's kind of cool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Lefty Diaz. I'm also lefty, by the way. So Go lefties. But unfortunately, again, I'm just not a very unemotional busting of these players so close to the final table. And again, I usually, we talk about how, Garfunkel is probably the worst final table bubbler of all time. I guess technically we can't say that Kniff was the bubbler because he kind of made the final table. It's like the one exception to the rule where he made the final table. I don't care if they call it informal. They stop play and begin the next day. That's the final table. So
I'll still leave it with the top 9. I mean, because then by that token, Michael Rand made back-to-back final tables, but he got 10th, so that doesn't count.
But they didn't stop play at 10 and then play the next day.
All right.
But in that
whatever makes you feel happy.
Again, a very weak penultimate episode of the final table. I mean, I remember the main event prior kind of had the same problem. It was a weak, 10th place bubble episode. And yeah, I mean, I besides Diaz busting because he made that big hero fold, so I'm happy he made a page jump before he busted at least. But either way, again, pretty weak sauce. More interviews about stuff. Diaz talks about the fold, how he played horrible, or I thought, his interview with Kara Scott was kind of interesting to watch because he seemed pretty hard on himself, which I guess if you're a pro, you should be if you're trying to win. But I think obviously he looks back now, he'll probably be pretty happy with how he played.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he should be happy, and it is kind of nice to see that humility that he's not upset at busting, he's not upset at Farns or anything. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah. So ultimately, again, a poor lead up into the episode. So again, our final thoughts on the final table. Each person, maybe like 3 or 4 of them had like a 1-sentence thing I could like describe about them to you. Everybody else just kind of blends together. Like Matthew Sue is a screamer, like let's go 9, 10, energy. Okay, fine. Kniff had his birthday thing happening that week, so that was a detail. That's knowing that the final table is Jorstad won the tag team event, so we had half a bracelet early in that summer. Everybody else, I can't tell you anything about them really.
Yeah, I mean, Juzak takes shots and goes all in. Farns, I mean, he's the one true amateur of the final table. You'd think they'd want to hype him up further. He did wrestling when he was a kid. That's about it. Suki, we know nothing about. I mean, he barely appears in this whole thing. And he's the short stack. So again, you can hype him up. Like, will the short stack come back and win this? So little about any of these guys. What their personalities are like, or what their poker playing style is like, or what their journey to the final table was like. Dobrich, I mean, yeah, gets the best I sort of journey edit because we saw him a little bit early on. But
I guess that's setting the bar pretty low.
Yeah, that's setting the bar really low. These other 9 guys, 9 out of the 10 of them, I really can't tell you what their journeys were like at all.
Yeah, and especially with Attenborough, he had a really up and down day 7 in final table to that degree. He was chip leader after doubling through Dobrik, and then he doubled up players, was down, then came back up, and he was middle of the pack when the final table began. But you never would have guessed that from this edit. Like he was maybe showing like 3 hands the entire coverage up to this point, so that was pretty shocking. Yours, Chad, we know he was a big stack for most of day 7 into the final table. And there was a tie at the top of the leaderboard. We had Sue and Jorstad of 82.5 million, which is the lead, but it again not as substantial a lead as say a Jamie Gold or a Greg Raymer had with the final table. And also because of how long day 7 dragged out, they're not nearly as deep big blinds wise as we've seen in past main events. And this arguably became the shortest stacked final table big blinds structure wise probably in a long time.
Yeah, Jorstad and Sue both had 83.2 million to end today. Dobrich had 68.6, and then Dusak had 56. So, I mean, still you have 15 million more than Dobrich does. But again, Jorstad or Sue get heads up in a hand. That's going to decide who the chip leader is. And then Dobrich and Dusak really aren't that far behind given what the blind structure is like. Everybody was in this. I mean, even Suki at 13.5 million, he could still maneuver his stack. He still had, room to do something. So again, to just not have any to go into this 13th episode with no real understanding of anything, no real hype, no real anything at all, and then to get Vince Vaughn's really odd narration, like it sounded like he was just reading it off of a piece of paper. And every single episode starts out with like, here we go on day 6, they're playing for a lot of money, who will win? And to hear that like 5 times over and over again, then have Vince Vaughn do it the 6th time, it's just really boring.
I totally agree. And, because there's not really a final table bubble per se, that means that we're kind of robbed of that ability to have that tension as viewers
Yeah.
because Kniff just busts, in the second hand of the episode. So we don't really get a chance to see people like, oh, even if they've been if they knew in advance, oh, we're playing down to 10 today instead of 9, then we could have had that with 11 players left, but we don't even have that. So that's one, spot of drama completely gone. And Dweck definitely kind of gets the lion's share of the focus early on. It's
Yeah.
kind of a Dweck show for the first bit of this first part of the final table, but there are several early all-ins that are totally skipped, and we see a few towards the end. But I didn't really get the full sense of the energy and the vibe of that first portion of the final table from 10 playing down to 8.
Yeah, I mean, we do have to talk about Dweck just killing kind of soul with flopping quads, ace king versus 10, such a classic flip. Here we go, let's see this happen, and then Dweck just flops through 4 kings, which is just
Yeah, we haven't seen it before, I don't think, in a spot like that before.
Yeah, I haven't seen that before. I saw this hand live and I was just like, all right, here we go, classic flip, let's see what happens. And then just see that was just sick. Yeah, I mean, Dweck definitely gets a big edit, and we get more of his personality than we had seen in any of the previous episodes. And he seems like a nice guy. Everybody on his rail likes him. He seems like a sweet guy. So it would have been nice to have, seen more of him earlier on. I don't know why they didn't show him more earlier on. But it is nice that at least at, the last minute, they got a little bit of an edit for him. But everybody else, yeah, I mean, we really don't get. This is supposed to be, the fall of Sue, that, when 9-handed in the official final table, because Asher Conniff is not at the official final table, begins, Sue is the chip leader, and he's like, he gets out in 9th. So, you have this for the first time since our, friend busted. So,
Yeah.
the least you can do. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Philip Hilm, our friend, busted in 9th, this supreme meltdown, so to speak. You could have this edit again, and they just don't give that edit. So it's very odd that they did that.
Yeah, I memean, we see a couple of the all-ins that Sue loses, to chip down, but they happen so fast, and we don't see the hands in between, so it just doesn't really feel like we're capturing his emotions on the camera. And even Adrian Attenborough, he was the short stack with 9 left, and he was down to 5 big blinds at one point, and you almost barely would even notice that, given how we see him double up once or twice, but really that we don't see how he fell too far and everything, so it was very strange.
Yeah, I mean, we get an interview with Jorstad talking about being having a master's degree in brewing science. That's kind of nice. But in terms of his playing style, I mean, the first hand he loses, so that was kind of an interesting from an edit perspective. But again, he stays towards the top of the pack for the most part. We don't really get any sense of what hands he plays or what he's doing. So that's kind of disappointing. And the same with Dobrich. I mean, Dobrich had so many swings at this final table, being the chip leader, being the guy who seemed like the guy to beat before busting. And I remember a hand where he had, I think it was like a flush or something, and there was like a paired board, and he was supposed to bet, and he checked at the end. I was surprised that hand didn't come up in here. Would have been interesting to kind of see that, like, oh, wow, Dobrich misplayed a hand, so to speak. But none of that. We get a celebration montage of him going, yeah, winning this hand. That's about it.
Yeah, when this foul table began, Soki was in 10th and Kniff was in 9th. So they're 2 of the first 3 to bust. So that's not particularly exciting. Obviously, Sue busting is unexpected, but and again, because he didn't do anything wrong when he busted in 9th, that you really have to hope that the hands we do see him in losing are entertaining, and then just kind of like flips or pocket pair versus pocket pair. There's just not much to it really there. They're all with all these hands happening, it's all in pre-flop versus like turn flop turn river action. It made the action seem pretty monotonous at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, but again, you can spice this up a little as chip leader goes out in 9th. He got so unlucky, queens versus 9s, things like that. There's little things you can do to draw out the pathos in this, and they just don't do that.
Yes. So again, it's a very mediocre episode. I was let down by it. Episode 2 of the final table, episode 14 overall, slightly better, I would say. 8 players playing down to 3. Dobrich is the chip leader, which you just never would have guessed. I mean, he wasn't involved in any of these hands that involved Sue falling down or anything. And Farnes was the short stack. And then on the first hand of the episode, Farnes doubles through Dobrich, so that flips their chip spots pretty substantially. And again, with the blinds up to 1 million, 2 million, even the chip leader, pretty short. We're talking like 50 big blinds maybe. And so it makes it feel a bit more like some of these more modern live streamed main event bracelet WSOP bracelet events where everyone's just kind of like got like 30 big blinds each, and it's a bit more of an even fight. But from there, there's so many bits in these episodes with the final table that it slows down the action. Like if you would expunge 2 or 3 of these and give us one more hand, that would have done a lot of positive work for the episode's quality.
Yeah, I mean, a big problem is we're going from 8 to 3. So it just happens very, very quick succession, players busting. And, there's, again, no sense of drama. I mean, when Duzak busts, I don't really feel anything. When Suki busts, I don't really feel anything. And again, part of that just has to do with the fact that these guys' personalities aren't that vibrant. I mean, no offense to Ames, but like he's just a blank slate. I mean, we barely get any emotion from him. We barely get any sense of how he plays in terms of poker. Farn's kind of the same deal, but there's again, it's just, cut out these bits. We don't need to hear, Kara Scott's interview with Dobrich. We kind of get that Dobrich is emotional. We don't really need to see this interview with Ames where he talks about treating poker like a game. We didn't learn anything about him or his poker style. Don't have a flashback to Conniff and Sue. You don't have to summarize the previous episode. We've all seen it. Just, little things you can do to save a little bit of extra time and just give us one more hand where we can see these people.
Yeah, I think with a flashback, if this is airing on broadcast TV, they probably are watching a marathon of episodes or back-to-back things, so they just saw it. On streaming, you just hit next episode, it plays. You don't need to be reminded. There's no context where a flashback is needed at all for these episodes. And in an in-episode flashback, there's the Cuervo moment of Suki busting, and we just saw him bust, so we don't need that to be shown. At least give us like some like meh hand in the background that just happened. And like, oh, we just watched a pot where Adrian Attenborough took down a pot pre-flop with ace queen or something. Let's do that or something like that. But probably the bigger problem with episodes is that there's not enough of Attenborough or Jorstad in the action. I mean, it's like, you can kind of one hand how many players left. We're barely seeing them at work. And then we don't see Dobrich going from first to fifth at all with any edit. He's just chip leader, and then he's not, and then now he's shoving all in and he's busting. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, Dobrich was the weirdest one, that he goes from the chip leader and he's freaking out and it's like he's going to win to then all of a sudden he's just gone. No story, no sense of anything. I mean, I understand if you only have 3 episodes to portray the final table, you only have so much wiggle room, but we didn't need to see all the hands we saw in the previous episode. We didn't need to see all these bits. So there's, again, opportunities you can find to let this stand out and so that we can see it. Or at least, just have the live version remain on PokerGo, remain online so that we can see this for ourselves. That would be kind of nice, but Yeah.
And then with the final episode of the season, episode 15, day 9, i.e. they played down to 3 players on day 8 for the final table with Dweck, Jorstad, and Attenborough. Probably easily the best episode of the final table of the 3.
Yep.
3-handed play actually pretty brief. Only on the third hand of second hand of the edit. Dweck shoves top pair when Attenborough had a straight, and he's gone. And Dweck was the short stack when 3-handed play began, so. With only 24 big blinds, you're obviously, you can't just, check back and hope that you're good or, change up things. You gotta go for it. And from there we get, again, probably one of the more enjoyable heads up face-offs and main event for quite some time. I want to say maybe even since Veo and Nguyen, and even prior to that, maybe even with P.S. Hines and Martin Statsko.
Yeah, I mean, this is a crazy heads up. The tank heard around the world, which I saw live, which I'm sorry, like, just silly. I just think it's silly to be doing everything that he was doing. Tanking for a minute, okay, that's totally fine. But I mean, for nearly 20 minutes with bottom pair, I mean, dude, come on.
Well, I mean, it's for $4 million. It's a lot of money, assuming no deals were made or anything, which I don't think there were. And to be fair, despite him making the correct fold, he does find a way to double up back into the chip lead. That tank was on the very first hand of heads up play, and he was, down by like 40 million, and so he lost a good chunk in that first hand. And then, it's a pretty good pendulum back and forth. I'm in the back of the chip lead, I'm back in the chip lead. The actual heads up match was only 18 hands in real life.
Yep.
And we get to see probably almost half of them in the episode, and it's a lot of the important ones. So in that respect, they did capture this battle very well. And I was entertained for this part at least.
Yeah, I was entertained for this too. I mean, I obviously knew what happened, but I can imagine if you didn't know what was happening, you didn't know that your set was going to win. You might think that Attenborough might have pulled it off, especially because they gave, a Kara Scott interview with, Kara Scott talking to the camera about Attenborough being the second Australian. That might momentarily trick you, especially because your set had a very small edit into thinking that Attenborough was going to win. But then we get to the last hand, which, I think I spoke about this when we were talking about the 2022 live before. I mean, Attenborough had won a number of hands beforehand. He was giving Jorstad some trouble. I would have just folded there, but he doesn't.
Well, I had not seen the hand really properly ever. And so when I saw it, and he had top pair on the flop. So that's probably if the board order was a bit different, if it was like 2-4 queen or any other configuration with 5 cards, he probably folds. But because of that run out specifically, I think that was the tipping factor to him making that call. And I think he had a lot of self chatter, as I call it, to himself as he's trying to work his way through it. And props to Jorstad. Prior to watching this season, I had not heard Jorstad's voice before, so I didn't know what he sounded like. So it was kind of amusing to hear him finally talk in this watching this. And Attenborough, he played really, really solid poker up until this point. And we barely really saw any of it. And besides that one hero call against Dobrik on day 7, we really barely saw any of it. So I was really let down that we couldn't see, this, Joe Hashim 2.0 at work here. Jorstad, he played well, but I felt like slightly that a good chunk of his winning was from just having big hand running the big hand, which is a part of poker. But I'm just saying, if I'm, compared to like a Greg Merson, who was just boss mode from start to finish. I didn't think that Jorstad maybe didn't have to play the best poker, but he obviously played very well.
Yeah, I mean, he gets a boat on the river in this last hand. I mean, that's just that just shows that it was his to win in terms of just how the cards fell for him. Again, I mean, I'm with you. Like both of them are very talented players for sure to make heads up, and they both made a number of right moves and got lucky in spots to get there. But we just don't have a good enough impression on the edit of either of these guys. If you're watching these, episodes, you're going to think, Zhang's going to make the final table. Then you're going to think, Kim's going to make the final table. There's all these, red herrings, but there's no breadcrumbs that lead you down the right path for Jorstad or Attenborough or Dweck to run deep. So there's just, you need to mix in some breadcrumbs that lead you in the right direction in addition to red herrings. And we just don't get enough of that. There's not a good enough balance throughout this whole episode.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure where I was going to place this main event on my hierarchy until after we began discussing it today. And I gotta say, I might put it as maybe, if not the worst, but like bottom 2, I think, of 2019. Because 2019, I was just bored the whole time, except for Mike's episode, Mike Levinsky's episode.
Right.
This one, I was just continually let down by the choices they were making in the editing booth, by just some of the the scatter-shot focus, the lack of coverage on the final 9/10. And so really, I don't know, it might be one of the bottom 2, maybe worse. It's in that conversation for me.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, 2011 for me, like I don't remember very well. I can't remember anything PS Hines did in terms of forgettability. I mean, I'm going to remember this for, how bad it is, so to speak. And yeah, Zilong Zhang, he had some funny moments. Rebay had some funny moments. Kenny Tran had some funny moments here and there. So there's stuff here to remember here and there.
All his events do have that.
Yeah, all of these main events have those little moments. But just overall, I mean, what do we really know about Espen Jorstad? He has a brewing science degree and he can meditate for 20 minutes at a time. That's nice. We know that about him. What do we know about Attenborough? He's Australian. He talks to himself in difficult spots. That's really about it. Mickey Dweck, he seems like a nice guy. Like there's just so insubstantial and just no sense of buildup, no sense of tension on day 7, no sense of tension leading to the money bubble because the money bubble is just in a short montage versus all of these flashbacks, all of these montages, all of these insubstantial interviews, just so much wasted time and so little details that really give us a sense of who these people are. It's just very disappointing.
It kind of reminded me of when the Harry Potter films are coming out. When you know the book so well, you're going to judge the movies a little bit more harshly than the average Joe might. And I knew this main event pretty well. I watched, I would say 90% of the live streams pretty, strongly. And so, I obviously am going to be more nitpicky than usual. But even then, I was astonished by how poorly this was edited. I mean, it's a competent, modern television production. It's not like there's, the camera's not like, blurry and is not out of focus. Like it's just what was on the page, what was on the screen as I was watching, just did not satisfy me.
Yeah, I mean the production design's fine.
Yeah.
It's nothing special. Again, they know what they're doing. They have a streamlined editing process, but hopefully for 2023, they can give a little bit more color and a little bit more light to each of these people. Again, there's some interesting stories in 2023 to talk about and an interesting final table dynamic to talk about. So hopefully, moving forward, they can just, be a little bit more patient, have, certain poker scenes stretched out, don't have all these montages, don't show bust out during the commercials, just stay focused on what, you should be doing, which is entertaining the viewer.
Totally agree. And with that, again, a negative note, but again, I enjoyed talking about bad television, and again, it's weird to call this bad television. It's just more like lackluster, can do better television.
Yeah, exactly.
And with that, I think we would be remiss to not discuss the recently concluded 2023 World Series of Poker in Paradise. We were very skeptical about this creation going in because we'd heard some of the headlines about the buffet rules and the prize pool and all these weird things. But, to my surprise, it did seem like the poker community was very receptive to this production.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed from what I saw a lot of the main event final table. I was able to see some of the, main event streams. It all seemed very, standard in comparison to the Las Vegas World Series of Poker. Everybody seemed to be having a decent enough time. I don't know if that was just because they got to go to the Bahamas for a little while, no problem. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, nothing super flashy in terms of, Eric Seidel winning his 10th brace. It's probably sort of the big headlining sort of, result of them all. But yeah, I mean, it was good to see a good mix of old players we'd seen as well as some new up and coming players, and good poker action throughout. Like I was pretty happy with a lot of what I saw.
Yeah, and with the main event in particular, it was a different structure. It was a bit more fast. I think levels are 40 or an hour, an hour. Multiple registrations allowed if you busted. I think it was a $5,300 buy instead of 10K. So guys like Negreanu could enter once, bust, and play the next day and be on the stream again. And so there were some pretty regular YouTube, TV table streams every day. That was fun. We had Boston Rob making a deep run. Negreanu did make the money at least. And both those guys would bust once, come back in the next day, do better. So that was nice to have not just begun after one, bad break. And I was pretty happy with that, even though I, maybe rank it in the main event importance, lower due to the rebuy structure and the lower buy-in. But it was good to watch. I was happy with it.
Yeah, and it was especially, seeing Zagal win the main event, who was somebody I hadn't really seen before. But yeah, sick call in the last hand. I mean, that was so much fun to watch live. I'm like, is he actually going to do it? Would I do it? The call with fourth pair with the Robbie is pretty impressive.
And I don't know if you heard this, but there was kind of a story, kind of a sequel to the Dario Sammartino, Nick Merchanton debacle, where a stack all in was miscounted, and then the incorrect number of chips were paid off at the final table. And so, as a result, that may or may not have affected the end result, but it's pretty shocking this would happen on a big event like this.
Yeah, they really got to be more careful with that. It's just that simple. I mean, again, part of that is the players. I mean, you really do have to look at somebody's stack, make sure you get an accurate count. There's nothing wrong with asking for a count before you call a bet. Just you have to have an extra step in there in order to be careful. But yeah, the organizers should also make the rules clear so that everybody knows this is what happens if there's a miscount.
Yeah, and then besides one of the big positive details of this production was the poker app that was used for buy-ins to register and whatnot. Everyone was really happy with that. So I think the tech side of things they really got right. So perhaps they might adopt that for Las Vegas or for Europe. We'll see. That would be good to see that sort of tech-wise advance, assuming the security is there for money being exchanging hands and stuff like that. So that's good to hear. And I'm happy that guys like Negreanu express their positivity to the event, and hopefully that will result in hopefully, more than just 1 or 2 years of this event, this event happening. I know that with the HBS event only happened for a one-off, but I'm happy to see the poker brand expand and be successful for once.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully they can, again, learn from the little things involving vendors and buffets
Yes.
for next year. Because, it's minor in the grand scheme of things now that we've seen in retrospect how the events be played. But yeah, just a little bit more clarity and consistency on that.
And then the other big story recently was the WPT Big One for one drop. The first year kind of not being involved at the Worlds of Poker. And something that I was very concerned about that did in fact come true is we had once again a decrease in the number of entrants. Only 17 players ponied up $1 million for this event. And comparing back to 2012, we had the full 48, then we had 42 or 41, then we had like 27 or 24, yeah. Now that's at 17. So it does kind of feel like this event's kind of dead in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the kind of the usual mainstays, and ultimately won by Mikita Badikowski, who had played in the one drop a few years prior against Negreanu and had Negreanu made a pretty epic hero fold of Jack 10 for a straight against on a paired board. And again, I just with only 7 million for first place, 17 players, just doesn't quite work for me. I think it might just be time for that tournament to die off.
Yeah, or just do a small buy and just have $100,000.
Yeah,
that's fine. I know it's not as romantic as $1 million, but or 250,000, something like that, 500,000, whatever, something like that. But get at least 27 players in there.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but Dan Smith, made the money, made it third place, very impressive. And second place was Mario Masbach, who was my favorite Ashton Kutcher lookalike in the 2018 main event. So I didn't know he was that big a player. So props to him for in the last 5 years raising his poker prominence and multi-million-dollar score here. He didn't win the whole thing, so congratulations to him and to Mikita Badikowski. If that ever happens again in 2024 or 2025, I wonder if it'll be even smaller. Honestly, I wonder what the breaking point is.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know.
I think of that, guys. We have finished this latest edition of our podcast. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good poker hand, I guess. I don't know. If you want to be a part of a later episode of our podcast, let us know. Always looking for interviewees. We've had some great viewership the last week with our Game of Gold finale episode and among other things. So props to all of our new listeners for making us very happy this holiday season.
Yeah, and probably we're not going to get another episode out before the new year. So we'll also wish you a happy new year. Hope that you had a decent enough year this year, that you had enough run good this year, and hopefully that your run good will continue into next year. And as Ben said, if you at all want to be on the show in any capacity, let us know. Also, any ideas for content. Keep in mind that the content for this episode, the 2022 main event, came from one of our viewers, right? They gave us a suggestion to go and review this one. So if you have any other suggestions, let us know, whether it's movies or television shows or whatever. It can be scripted poker. We don't really care. We're happy to review it.
Exactly, guys. So until next time, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, and enjoy your poker on TV.
Take care, everyone. Make sure to fold the Jack 4.
Bye, guys.